Well, it's nice to be back after 2 weeks off. Yeah. Got some quick business I want to talk about because of the Springport decision the other day for proponents of same-sex marriage, that has passed. Pastor Steve has decided that I think this is great wisdom that on Monday night in the Olivet Church downtown, okay, in the office downtown, we are going to have an emergency church-wide prayer meeting at 7 o'clock to seek God's forgiveness for the United States of America, to seek His comfort, but just literally, we're all Americans. We all put politicians in office. We all put judges on stands. We are all in this together. This is not a non-Christian Christian thing. This is our responsibility to pray for America. So at 7 o'clock on Monday night, if you can get into Olivet downtown, we will be having a prayer meeting for that specific purpose. Okay? A little bit of mission recap for you. Let you know what went on down there. Some of you poured time and money and effort and prayers and all these things for our kids. I'm going to tell you right now, I've been in a lot of cities and I've seen homelessness and prostitution and drug dealers and all these types of things that you see in major cities. I did not see anything in Philadelphia that shocked me. The greatest thing I saw in Philadelphia was, by the way, Ben's and Kate's group went from Dearborn with us down there. Okay, so we had 30 kids. It was Matt and I and Ben and Kate with these 30 kids. And I tell you right now, I was so proud of our 30 kids. Those 30 Christian kids were so courageous. They worked hard when we worked. We did a lot of yard work. We did a lot of things. Some painted, some worked in factories where they were refurbishing furniture for homeless people who were getting into apartments and things. And the kids just worked so hard. But on the last Wednesday, I guess a week ago, we went downtown Philadelphia just sharing water, food, the gospel with the homeless. And our kids, man, they were just like hawks looking for people they could talk to. They were fearless. And it was awesome to see that. So it's nice to see that the next generation, we have some Christian kids that are hungry to share Christ with other people. And so that was amazing. That was my special report right there. So, other than the fact that it's a terrible drive to Philadelphia, it's Pennsylvania, I'm sure a lot of you have been to Pennsylvania, it's NASCAR in the mountains. And driving a minivan at NASCAR speed in the mountains with kids in the back, I was a nervous wreck for 12 hours. It was a 12-hour drive, and by the time I got back, but so the day we were leaving, I was pretty wore out, and I thought, but my biggest regret was the 12-hour drive is going to kill me, and I can't wait. I just cannot wait to get home. So we've been talking about Abraham and waiting, being in God's waiting room, and today we're going to close that up. So we started that a month ago, and then due to being gone and then Steve coming in, and so this is the last sermon on the waiting room today. Okay, and out there in Philadelphia, I came up with something that I read that I wanted to share with you about waiting, and it goes like this: not the examination room, that's down the hall; not the consultation room, that's on the other side of the wall. Not the treatment room. Exams, consultations, and treatments, those all come later. We in the waiting room understand our assignment, to wait. We don't treat each other. I don't ask the nurse for a stethoscope or a blood pressure cuff. I don't pull up a chair next to the woman with a newspaper and say, tell me what prescriptions you are taking. That's the job of the nurse. My job is to wait, and so I do. But we are the giddy-up generation. We weave through traffic looking for the faster lane. We get mad at the person who takes 11 items in the 10 items or less express checkout. We drum our fingers while waiting for a movie to download and for the microwave to heat up our coffee. We want six-pack abs in 10 minutes or less and minute rice in 30 seconds. We don't like to wait. Not on the doctor, not on the traffic, not on the pizza, and not even on God. We are a hurry-up bunch of people, aren't we? That's powerful, and it's a perfect picture of who we are, especially in America. We are on the go. And waiting is just plain hard. I could not wait to get off the road the other day coming back from Philadelphia just to get home. I couldn't wait to get out of the mountains just to get into farmland, to tell you the truth. But waiting is hard, and it's something we have to do all our lives. I've been doing it off and on, different phases of life, as long as I can remember. And we get stuck in those real difficult seasons of life. Every one of us do. And those seasons are the waiting rooms that God puts us in. Okay? Those are the ones that He puts us in. So we've asked the question over the last couple of weeks. How do we build our faith while we're stuck in the waiting room of life? How do we build it? It's more than an inconvenience. It's annoying. It can be very tough. It's a challenge to our faith. And we have to ask questions, serious questions, while we're doing it. Instead of focusing on where we're at and what's going on, we have to ask some serious questions. One would be, how do I actually build my faith? How do I actually build my character? How do I build what God has planned for me? How do I have God build this into my life? And our example for the last month or so has been Abraham, right? We have a map of Abraham and Abraham's life. I'm going to put that up there just to recap what we talked about last month. Kind of a geographical thing here for you. Like my new clicker there? Not the point anymore. Yeah. Dollar General. You can't see it. All right. That stinks. I'm going to fix this right now. It doesn't work on the screen. All right. Abraham is standing in Saudi Arabia. Okay? The water to his right is the Persian Gulf, and that is Kuwait. Up the mountains up there, that's Iran. Up in Iran, where they want to bomb everybody. You got Nineveh is right in the region where we have modern-day Baghdad. Okay? Haran up there at the top is Turkey. All right, so now, the bottom right, Ur in Babylon area. That's where Abraham was born and raised. And at some point, Abraham's father took his whole family, which was about a lot of people, and they moved northward along the Euphrates River, that blue line, up to Haran, okay, which is Turkey, modern-day Turkey. And that's where we first picked up with Abraham. Abraham was 75 years old, and God visited him, which I'm sure was quite dramatic, okay? And God told Abraham to get out of there. Take your wife and your family and all your belongings and get away from your father's home, and I want you to move to a place that I will show you. So they moved downward the blue line, through Damascus, down through Canaan, and they went there. Okay? And you remember that they had a drought. Abraham panicked. They moved on to Egypt, got kicked out of Egypt. They came back to Canaan. That was the Canaan right there is modern-day Israel, where God wanted Abraham. Okay? Sorry about the pointer. That was weird. Okay. Let's move on here. For me, there's two Old Testament characters that are my favorite. One is Abraham, the other is Moses. Okay, those are my two favorites. Because Abraham's not just a guy with incredible faith. He's more realistic to me. He's a guy who makes a lot of mistakes. Okay? I've made a lot of mistakes, and I can see a lot of what he did in my own life, because he often panicked when the going got tough. He got frustrated. He got desperate while waiting in the waiting room. He often questioned God, and he wondered what to do. And instead of waiting for an answer, he just made up his own mind to do something, and usually it backfired on him. So to me, that's way more understandable, way more relatable character than somebody who just did something right all the time. I don't know if there was anybody who ever did that, but I relate to people who mess things up real well. He's just a guy. He's just a husband. He's just a dad. He's just a guy that I can learn from, and we can all learn from. That's who Abraham was, and I'm sure that's why God made such a big deal out of Abraham and and why his life spans 13 chapters in the book of Genesis. We saw that he makes a real mess of things. He makes he lies, he gets in trouble, he gets kicked out of the country, he tells people that his sister is his sister, he knows she's his wife. That makes sense, doesn't it? His wife was his half-sister. But in God's eyes, she was his wife. Don't be lying about who your wife is, she's not your sister. But God always forgives him and brings him back. Because Abraham repented every single time he made a mistake. He knew he screwed up. But God forgave him. He always brought him back. And he always fixed things. So today we're going to wrap this story up. And we're going to show what it looks like when we allow God to build our faith in the waiting room. Okay? That's like the end product is what we're looking at. It takes a long time. Doesn't happen overnight. And that's why waiting is so important. That's why patience is so important. Remember what we said about Abraham and Sarah, his wife. They were discouraged because they did not have an heir. They did not have an heir. They did not have a son to pass on their worldly wealth because they were loaded with lots of camels and donkeys and sheep and all those other things. Okay? They had servants. They had a huge caravan. Huge. And it was, he was 75 years old in Haran when God visited him. Okay? And God said, you're going to have an heir. You're going to have a son who you can pass all this on to. But think now, if you're 75 and you haven't had that son yet, and God says you're going to have this child, what are you going to think? Well, he's talking about like in 9 months from now. He's talking about maybe a year from now. We'll give it a couple months, get going, But a year, it's going to be a short period of time. But unfortunately, it's 25 years. I shouldn't say unfortunately, it just is. It's 25 years later. Okay? Now remember, Abraham had Ishmael with his wife's slave girl. He already had a son, but what God done? That boy is not going to be the heir of your wealth. He's not going to be the heir of your bloodline. I'll bless that kid. We'll take care of him. And obviously, when you look out and you see every era person in this world, wherever you go, that is the offspring of Ishmael. So obviously, Ishmael was very well blessed, right? But God comes through on his promises 25 years later. He told him, you will have a son. You will have an heir to pass on all your business to. But you're going to have to wait 25 years. I don't know how that would be a heck of a wait when you're already 75 years old. Turn with me in your Bibles. And on your sermon notes, it's got kind of flipped around. The actual first one we're going to look at is Genesis 21, 1 through 7. It's on the back. Got flipped around on it. Everybody there? Okay. Look at that first part of verse 1. Then the Lord did exactly as he had promised. That's some of my favorite words. Exactly as he had promised. God promised in the Old Testament that there would be a Messiah, and there was. Jesus came. God promised it throughout the Old Testament, and there was. In the New Testament, we have the promise that the Messiah is coming back to get us someday, and it will happen. God keeps his promises. Look at verse 2. She, as in Sarah, became pregnant, and she gave birth to a son for Abraham in his old age. This happened at just the right time God had said it would. And Abraham named their son Isaac. The baby names used to mean something. My mother's here today. She named me. My real name is Jared. It means awesome in Hebrew. Right, Mom? Okay. All right. Okay. Yep. About right? Okay. Or special. Was it special? Oh, okay. I'm sorry. Awesome. Okay. Verse 4. 8 days Isaac was born, Abraham circumcised him as God had commanded. And Abram was 100 years old when Isaac was born. And Sarah declared, God has brought me laughter. All who hear about this will laugh with me. Isaac means laughter. Isaac means laughter. Sarah, by the way, is 90 years old. 90 years old. My grandmother is 89 and she has no condition to be having babies. I'm just going to tell you that right now. Okay? No condition whatsoever. Let's look at verse 7. For who would have dreamed that I would ever have a baby? Yet I have given Abraham a son in his old age. So you've got this great-great-grandparent age, a couple going to Desert Mart, getting goat-skin diapers for their firstborn kid. You know? Yeah. So they're excited. 100 years old and 90 years old, and they just had their first child together. Okay? Fast forward now to flip it over to Genesis chapter 22. Scholars aren't quite sure how much time elapses here. They believe it's around 20 years or so. Okay? And Isaac is either in his late teens or his early 20s. So usually in all the pictures that depict Abraham and Isaac together for the sacrifice, or in the movies or anything like that, they're usually inaccurate because they got like this 4 or 5-year-old boy. This is probably a young man, maybe 20 years old. Okay? He is not a little boy anymore. So let's look at Genesis chapter 22, 1 through 2. Later on, God tested Abraham's faith and obedience. Abraham called God called. Yes, he replied, here I am. Now this response is a prostrate response of obedience. Imagine Abraham on his face. That is the context of what's going on here. He hears God's voice and he hits the floor, face down. Yes, here I am. Okay? It's an obedience. And then verse 2, the shock. Take your son, your only son, yes, Isaac, whom you love so much, and go to the land of Moriah. Go and sacrifice him as a burnt offering on one of the mountains, which I will show you. Now, God says, your son, your only son. Technically, this is not his only son, but in God's eyes, this is the heir. He already has Ishmael. He has Ishmael, but he has sent Ishmael and Hagar, the boy's mother, away. Remember? Now, to Muslims, it goes Abraham, Ishmael, the firstborn. There's the conflict. Isaac is a Hebrew. He's nothing. It's totally flipped. Abraham and Ishmael. And those are the fathers of the Arab nation. And there's where Islam derives from. Okay? It comes right down the line there through their lineage. So he tells them to take him to Mount Moriah, or the area of Moriah. Mount Moriah becomes a very, very famous place, and it's a very meaningful place to us today. 1,000 years after this happened, David built an altar on Mount Moriah. Okay? And then 70 years later, King Solomon, David's son, built a temple on Mount Moriah. Now this is the same temple that Jesus cast the coin changers and all the people selling stuff. Same temple. Same place. 2,000 years later. Okay? It's still there today, by the way. There's the Wailing Wall and the Dome of the Rock. This is the most contested territory. This is the most contested property in the entire world. Because it means something to the Christians, it means something to the Jews, and it means something to the Muslims. This is a hotbed of activity. Is a hotbed of conflict right there on Mount Moriah, where God is telling Abraham to take his son and sacrifice him. So you say, well, sacrifice, what's going on here, right? God is a God of love. What's this sacrifice junk all about, right? It's a disturbing thought. Sometimes things in the Bible are very disturbing. and we're not quite sure how to figure them out. It's uncomfortable. And sometimes the Bible's uncomfortable. But there was a lot going on there. See, Abraham's in Canaan, and the Canaanites are doing it. The Canaanites are worshiping gods that want child sacrifice. I counted up at least 23 gods that the Canaanites have for different things, whether it be fertility, crops, rain, sunshine, whatever. They had about 23 of them. But some of them that might sound familiar to you if you are familiar with the Bible, if you've read it for a while. One would be Baal, and the other would be Molech. Two gods they worshiped that wanted child sacrifice. Now, I want you to think about something. We have child sacrifice in the world today. We have child sacrifice in the United States. It goes on every single day. Once again, we've allowed people to make decisions for us that are opposite of what we believe. The question is, how do I respond when God seems to be asking me to give up something I have been working on for a long time, or something that I've been waiting for? Okay? He has been waiting for all these years for his son, and now the boy's growing up, and God's asking him to give it up. Give it up. Most of us have had to wait for things in life. I've had to wait. You've had to wait. But how many of us have had to wait 25 years for something that we were just dying for? You ever had to do that? I have not had to do that yet. 25 years, just like Abraham. And now he's being asked to give up his child, the one he loves. Give it up. And in kind of a gruesome way. So how would you respond? How would I respond? What would you do? I don't want to be asked that question. I don't want to even think about having to do that. But giving up things in life is a progression. We all do it. It's part of growing up, getting older, and then finally leaving this earth. But what do we think? Some of the things that we give up in our lives, we give up our kids, because they do grow up, and then they do move on. We give up our careers because we can't work anymore. We lose our earning power. We are no longer in the working world. Our health slowly fades. Sometimes as the kids move out and all that, we downsize at home. We don't have enough space. Our spouse, one of us is going to go first unless we go out. And we've told the kids, Bobby and I, we mess around with the kids. We tell them that if we find we're both failing in health at the same time, there's a mountain down in Tennessee where her grandma lives, and we're just going to tell them that's where we'll be. You'll find us at the bottom. So that's a joke, though. We don't do that. We give up our independence. Have you ever been in a nursing home? I worked in a nursing home for a while. They lose their independence big time in every way. One of the biggest things that people have to give up is their animals. People have their favorite dogs, and they can't take them to the nursing home. But their health goes, they count on everybody to do everything for them. And in life, one day we will face death, and we'll have to give it up. Unless God comes and gets us out of here. Bobby and I had to give up some things recently. He called us to become small group leaders a couple years ago, and we did. But we had to leave our small group, our friends. We left Dean Peters' group and became our own small group leaders, and it's been fantastic. We have great, great friends, and we love them so much, and it's been a blessing. But then we were called to leave the church entirely from all of that and come to Springport. So we left our friends, we come over here, and it's been awesome, and now we have home. Yeah. So sometimes the things we give up are small, and sometimes they're not. But what if, there's a question for you. And Bobby and I talked about this. What if God calls Bobby and I to plant City on the Hill in the Caribbean? Would we give that up? That'd be a tough choice, I don't know, especially in the middle of winter. I haven't got that call yet, though, so don't worry about it. Let's look at your sermon notes, though. Come on down, we'll make a big old home all together. In your sermon notes, number 1. Receiving God's best often requires me to take ridiculous steps of faith. Ridiculous steps of faith. And sometimes we do that. I think it'd be ridiculous to think about going to the Caribbean, but you know what? If God calls me, I'm going to have to go. So. But Abraham shows us what it means, really. Getting back seriously. So Abraham shows us what this means. Let's look at Genesis 22:1 again. Sometime later, God tested Abraham's faith. Tested him. He's testing his faith. Now, God doesn't tempt us. Satan is the tempter. God's not tempting Abraham. He's testing him. And why is he doing this? Why does God test us? Well, when you're on your spiritual journey of life, you better be taking notes as you move through life, because there's going to be times of testing. God's going to throw a test at you, so you better be taking those notes and being aware of what he wants you, how he wants you to respond. He has a perfect purpose for testing each and every one of us, and we all go through different tests. Listen to the words of the half-brother of Jesus. That would be James. This is not your sermon notes. I'm just going to read it to you. James 1, verses 2 and 3. James talks about testing. Dear brothers and sisters, when troubles of any kind come your way, consider it an opportunity for great joy. For you know that when your faith is tested, your endurance has a chance to grow. So why does God test us? God is testing our faith to see if it is ready for his purpose. And I think it's not only a test that so he can see where we're at, because I'm pretty sure God knows what we're going to do. It really is a cue for us to know where we stand. Because we know when we fail the test. I sure do. And I know you do. You have that little voice in your head, man, stand up. You know? And it gives you a barometer to check yourself. Okay? In our house, I'm the food tester. That's my job. Okay? Bobby's cooking away. Come over here, check the noodles, check chicken, check. That's my job. Okay? I am the food tester. That's part of my duties in the home. God tests our faith to see if it's ready. He tests it so we know if it's ready, or we can improve upon it. And that's what he's been doing for Abraham for 25 years. This isn't a punishment for Abraham. This is like making sure that turkey is ready on Thanksgiving. Okay? One of the most important questions that we can, once we're in those testing times and those waiting periods, we ask God, what are you trying to accomplish in my life right now? Instead of, why are you doing this to me? What are you trying to accomplish in my life right now? You see the difference? Opens up a whole different can. What are you trying to do for me? How about that? So we got to make asking that question a pattern that we get into. Instead of feeling bad about what we're in, instead of feeling sorry for ourselves. Now there are going to be times tragedy comes and grieving is a good thing. It's not a bad thing. But once we move past that, we have to get to the point where we ask God, what are you doing for me? What are you doing with me so I can be more like you? He's always working to build our character. And I'm a big character guy because of coaching and being around youth. He's always working to build that character in our life. But look at number 2 of your sermon notes. There's a but there. Number 2. Number 2 says, if I won't allow God to build my character in the waiting room, I will have a much more difficult time when I'm tested. It's going to be a lot more difficult if you are not a person who has endured and allowed God to create character in you. And we've all known those Christians who were on fire. Man, they got saved, they came to church, and for a time they were excited and everything was going great. And then the tests of life came. Tests of life hit hard. And they had the wrong perspective on what God was doing in their lives. And they bailed. They bailed. They don't come to church anymore. They come up with other things to do on Sunday. Does that mean they're unsaved? That certainly doesn't mean that. It just means that they're not growing, they're regressing. Like a muscle, we talked about muscles that atrophy. That's what they are. They're a decaying muscle. They're a shrinking muscle. They're not growing, and they're not going to be used. So that's why it's vital that when we're in these waiting periods of life, that we allow God to create that character, to develop that endurance. That's what He's doing. It's for our benefit, not for our injury, not for our punishment. Number 3, in your sermon notes, it is easier to obey God when I have developed the habit of obedience. And Abraham has absolutely developed this habit over 25 years or more. Now his son's almost 20. Let's say a 40-some year period. Okay? It's been a long time. Look at me in Genesis 22:3. The next morning, Abraham got up earlier than normal must be, and he saddled his donkey and took his 2 servants with him, along with his son Isaac. Then he chopped wood for a fire, for a burnt offering, and set out for a place God had told him about. That's serious obedience. He got up, he did exactly what he was supposed to do. He chopped the wood. I mean, he is not questioning. You know this dad, this 120-year-old dad, is terribly, he's just awful inside. You can imagine the gut-wrenching feelings going on inside this man. But he knows who God is, and he knows who is in charge. God said go, and Abraham went. That's the bottom line. Here's the key now. This is a 40-year period or so. He had already developed the habit of being obedient. He learned lessons from Egypt. He also, things that we haven't even talked about, he actually lied about Sarah being his sister twice. Okay? He got in trouble twice doing that. So he's learned lessons along the way, and here we are at the culmination of this thing. And he does it obediently. It might be difficult, but he knows what to do. See, when it comes to obeying God, the difficult thing and the right thing are usually the same thing. They're the same thing. Life is hard. It's easy to make fleshly decisions and find the easy way around things, but God's way is this way. And there might be a lot of jungle, there might be a lot of deep gullies and things we have to work our way through, troubles to work our way through, but it's the right way to go. That's not a wimpy Christianity either. Christianity is not a wimpy. If you're a follower of Christ, you can't be a wimp. You've just got to do it. It's difficult to be a follower of Jesus, but it's always the right thing to do. Here's some questions. What are some of the habits God is building in you right now while you're in your waiting room? No matter where you are. Maybe you're not in a waiting room. Maybe a waiting room is ahead, though. What's one area of your life that you need to start to obey that you're not doing it yet? Maybe it's a conversation you need to have with a child. I've got 2 kids that need a conversation right now. 2 out of 3 ain't bad. The other one's doing okay. They're all doing okay. But I have 2 children that need a conversation from Dad right now. Maybe it's an unhealthy addiction or a destructive pattern in your life. Maybe you need to take some acts of generosity and help some people that you know are hurting. Maybe you need to step out of your comfort zone and share your faith like those kids did. I tell you what, they were so courageous. I was so proud of them. Step out of your comfort zone and share your faith. How about inviting somebody to church? All surrounded by people at work and schools and wherever that we can invite somebody to church. Look at number 4 in your sermon notes with me. God's provision in the past provides me with hope for my future. I can think of times in the past that God has provided, and at the time I didn't know it, but looking back I can see it. He has provided, and it gives me hope that there will be a future, that He will be there. Verse 5 in chapter 22 in your sermon notes there, Abraham starts talking to his servants. He says, "Stay here with the donkey." Abraham told his servants, "The boy and I will travel a little farther. We will worship there, and then we will come right back." So Abraham placed the wood for the burnt offering on Isaac's shoulders. This is one reason why scholars believe that he was a teenager right here. Okay? He's putting the wood on the kid. This isn't a little boy. Okay? This is not a little kid. And he says, while he himself carried the fire and the knife. As the two of them walked on together, Isaac turned to Abraham and said, "Father?" "Yes, my son," Abraham replied. "We have the fire and the wood," the boy said, "but where is the sheep for the burnt offering?" Isaac's been to sacrifices before. He's seen this before. He knows that there's supposed to be something to kill. And right now there's not. He's getting a little bit worried there. But here's Abraham's faith in God. Okay? Verse 8. "God will provide a sheep for the burnt offering, my son," Abraham answered. And they both walked on together. Now, I don't know what Abraham was thinking. I don't know if he really thought God was going to put a sheep out there. I don't know if he thought God wasn't going to leave him hanging. I don't know if he thought God would, even if he killed his son, because this was the promised heir, that God would raise him from the dead. There's been all kinds of things said about this. I don't know what this man was thinking all these years ago. But Abraham knew what number 5 says. Look at number 5. God loves to come through for me, especially in the impossible circumstances of my life. You'd already learned that lesson the tough way. God comes through even in the impossible circumstances of my life. Continue on in verse 9. When they arrived at the place where God had told them to go, Abraham built an altar and arranged the wood on it. Then he tied his son Isaac and laid him on the altar on top of the wood. And Abraham picked up the knife to kill his son as a sacrifice. At that moment, the angel of the Lord called from heaven, "Abraham, Abraham." And once again, in obedience, that prostrate on the ground obedience to the word of the Lord, the voice of the Lord, Abraham says, "Yes, yes, here I am." And the angel says, "Don't lay a hand on that boy. Do not hurt him in any way. For now I know that you truly fear God. You have not withheld from me even your son, your only son. Now I know the level of your faith and the level of your obedience." In coaching, we have an old saying, in teaching too, teaching or coaching, especially in football, because you've got 11 kids on the field at one time. If you're practicing, you've got 11 kids. I'm only one guy. I can only watch one kid at a time. I can't watch all 11 of them and tell if they're doing it right. But we have a thing. You watch one kid on every play, whether it's practice or a game, you watch them and you tell them exactly you did it right or you did it wrong, so they know. And what did the angel just say? Now I know that you will do what I say to do. And now Abraham knows, I'm doing things right. Okay, so he got that reassurance right there. But here's the deal. I believe that Isaac shows great obedience too. Okay? Here's Isaac. Is not a little boy. He's a young teenager, young man. He's probably 15 to 22 years old, something like that. Okay? And Abraham is 120. Now, my son Austin is 16 and I am 46. He's like this tall, 180 pounds. He's a good wrestler and all these. When we wrestle, he beats the crap out of me. He just does. I love it because he's like my own personal chiropractor with back pops and all that. But if we were really in a fight, if I was going to kill Austin, I would really have to fight for it. Okay? I believe a 15 to 22-year-old boy could take a 120-year-old guy down pretty easy. Okay? He isn't fighting his dad on this. He's not fighting for it. I believe that Isaac said, "All right, Dad," because you know what? Isaac has been raised by a man with great faith. He's been taught to trust in God. And now he sees his dad being obedient. And he's saying, if you're going to trust in God, I'm going to trust in God. And he lets his dad tie him up. And he gets up on that altar. He is showing tremendous faith. He climbed down that altar himself. So his deep faith, Abraham's deep faith, inspired Isaac to be obedient. He was obedient to his father because his father was obedient to his father. How do I get better at hearing God speaking in my life? How do we get better at it? Think about that question. Think of all the ways that you get the news. How do you get the news in your life? The TV, the internet, the radio, the newspaper, emails. How do you get information? All these things. How do you get God speaking to you in your life? We have multiple ways of letting God speak to us. Multiple ways. Obviously, coming to church today and listening to Preacher Boy here is one way. Now, that's only one way, right? How about reading your Bible and listening to what God has to say? How much time do you spend in that? I have people all the time tell me, I just don't get it. I don't understand it. You know, let's get you a Bible that you can understand in the American language, okay? Whatever it takes. How about prayer and reflection? How much time do you spend in prayer? Or maybe even journaling. You are a journaler? You write notes about your life? How about praise and worship music? Do you jam out in your house when nobody's around or whenever it is around? Doesn't matter. How about your car? Are you jamming on Jesus? Okay? There's also input from fellow believers. Remember the cars. You can see your life. About small groups. I love our small group. Get plugged into a small group if you're not in one. Bible studies. We have a men's group and a ladies group here. We study the Word of God together. That's how you learn. That's how you hear God. And the more you develop your sensitivity to hearing from God, the more you're going to hear from Him. The more you're going to hear from Him. Look at number 6. Number 6, always be on the lookout for God's provision in the midst of my testing. Always be on the lookout for God's provisions in the midst of my testing. Let's continue on in Genesis chapter 22 and verse 13. Then Abraham looked up and saw a ram caught by its horns in a thicket. So he took the ram and sacrificed it as a burnt offering in place of his son. And Abraham named the place Jehovah Jireh, which means the Lord will provide. The Lord will provide. To this day, people still use that name as a proverb. You know that? The old proverb says, on the mountain of the Lord will provide. Jehovah Jireh. God provided for Abraham in the middle of that test. And I mean, none of us have been through anything like that before. Nothing. But he had a plan. God had that planned out all the way. And he wasn't going to allow Isaac to be harmed. He wasn't going to let that happen. God doesn't want child sacrifices. But the only child sacrifice God ever accepted was his own child, Jesus. He sacrificed his own child for us, so we didn't have to do that. All of us can have Abraham-like faith if we commit to learning the lessons in the waiting room. Develop the patterns of obedience, of listening, not taking shortcuts, and in trusting God, no matter how difficult it might seem. Hebrews chapter 11 gives a great summary of Abraham's faith, and I'll just read this to you, a couple of verses, okay? In verse 8, this is what it says: by faith, Abraham, when called to God to a place he would later receive as an inheritance, obeyed and went, even though he did not know where he was going. Verse 9 says, by faith, he made his home in the promised land like a stranger in a foreign country. Verse 11 says, by faith, Sarah herself received power to conceive even when she was past the age. 90 is slightly past that age. Verse 17, by faith, Abraham, when he was tested, offered up Isaac. Over and over, what does that start out with? By faith. By faith, by faith. But he didn't start out, Abraham didn't start out, remember, he didn't start out in Haran as a giant faith person. He wasn't this monster of faith. He was obedient, but he was not tested yet. It wasn't a one-time experience. It wasn't the time he went into Egypt and got kicked out and he was perfect. No, the story went on and on and on for decades. It was built over time. It was built over time. Where are you at right now in your faith journey and where God is taking you and making you and building your faith and your character? Where are you guys at right now? Where am I at right now? Maybe you're at the beginning. Maybe today's the day that you're in Haran and you're getting that person. You're that person that's hearing God for the first time. Maybe you're hearing God say, go. Go. Or maybe, you're saying, I'm trusting in you, Lord. Maybe this is that day. Maybe you answered that call a long time ago, but you're stuck in one of those seasons, in one of those waiting rooms, and it's difficult. And maybe it feels like your prayers are just never answered. They're just ignored altogether. Remember, God says, just wait. I'm right here. Just wait. I am right here. And maybe you got tired of waiting. Maybe you got tired of waiting and took matters into your own hands and it backfired on you. You took a shortcut and it went wrong. Just like Abraham, it's time to come back to the one who forgives. It's time to come back. Possibly you're in that place of testing right now. There's something you need to give up. It's time to put it over, take whatever it is he's asking you to give up, turn it over to him. Wherever you're at, let me ask you, what kind of encouragement do you need to move forward? What is it going to take?